In the spirit of the Tholos Circle, where ancient thinkers gathered to debate the issues of today, this is Tholos Talks. Through deep insight and thought-provoking dialogue, we offer the tools to decode complexity and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome back to Tholos Talks. This is episode 10 of Coffee Traded Tech and our first episode of 2026, and a timely one at that. We're going to be digging into what happened at CES this year, what CTA members are grappling with in today's trade disruptive world, and the upcoming USMCA review. What could that mean for America's technology ecosystem? And to do that, we're very fortunate to have someone who was on the ground at this year's CES session, chairing 4 separate panels. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Ed Brzytwa. Ed, thanks for joining us. You currently serve as the Vice President of International Trade at the Consumer Technology Association, or CTA, where you lead the global trade policy efforts on behalf of the consumer technology industry. Ed, you've had a long career working from the Department of Commerce, the Office of U.S. Trade Representative, and multiple trade associations representing sectors ranging from chemicals to IT to consumer technology now. Ed, super excited to have you with us today. Welcome to Tholos Talks.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake. And I like the name of your podcast, Coffee, Trade, and Tech. You know, we've had some coffee tariffs this year. It's made everybody pretty much unhappy in the United States.
Get them while you can now.
That's right.
So Ed, let's just jump right in. CES is always the premier event kicking off the new year. You were on the ground this year. You moderated several sessions. For people who weren't there, what stood out to you the most compared to past events? What genuinely felt new versus hype?
So this is my 5th CES, and I can tell you that this was the biggest one yet. My first CES was right in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, during the Omicron surge. And we had at that time, even like in 2022, 40,000 people. This time we had almost 150,000 people, 50,000 from outside the United States. And you could feel it. I mean, the show floor was packed. The hallways were packed. There's people everywhere. And what stood out to me from a technology standpoint was we've talked a lot about AI in the past and the future of AI. Now we're seeing AI integration into physical products, what we're calling physical AI. And that was everywhere on the show floor. You could not avoid it. And I feel the other big change for me anyway was the sheer number of U.S. government people there, people from governments around the world, to be honest. We had post-pandemic a record number of government guests from across the United States government and people from embassies, people from governments around the world. So that felt very new to me anyway. I mean, I haven't been doing CES as long as some people at CTA, but at least post-pandemic, that was new.
On the government attendees, you moderated, 4 panels at CES?
That's right.
Kind of competing in a trade disruptive world, rethinking manufacturing, hot topics in Washington. I guess, what was the feel like in those rooms? Was conversation? I assume they were packed, from head to toe.
Yeah, packed audiences. Particularly because of the fact that we had these government guests, right? People want to hear from this administration. 2 of the panels out of the 3 that you mentioned, we had U.S. government speakers. But for the competing in a trade disrupted world panel, my guest was the EU ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Jovita Nelliop-Siena. This was an important conversation because we don't exist in a world where the United States is in a vacuum. I mean, we still have this global approach to technology and innovation, and CES is the place to talk about that. So for me, when we get the policymakers in the industry in the room together, it's magic because we really can build bridges. We can hear exactly what people are thinking from a governance standpoint, and they hear what industry's thinking about, and maybe that results in change, more positive change for the industry and for companies.
So what were some of the key themes in those discussions? Because when you hear EU digital, I automatically think of GDPR, their privacy regime, kind of the global regulator, if you will, of privacy, the implementation of the AI Act, the DMA, DSA. Those are kind of the legacy issues. What were those conversations like at CES?
So we did talk about that with the ambassador, head of the competing in a trade disrupted world panel. And, I think there's an acknowledgement that, regulation of digital technologies, these digital measures, as I call them, they may have gone too far, but at the same time, the ambassador said, we're going to continue to regulate. We just need to make sure that there's a balance. And I came away from that discussion with a bit of positivity because, we did talk about how even inside Europe, there's this conversation about, well, how do we be more innovative? And I had two different conversations with the ambassador. I think they're doing some really interesting things to support startups in Europe, for example. It's not easy to compete with the United States with respect to our deep capital pools and our record and history of innovation. But the EU seems to want to do better in this space. And I heard directly from the ambassador of Lithuania to the United States, the ambassador of Estonia to the United States. They were part of this panel in our startup stage too. And, those are small countries, but they're, punching above their weight. So there's a lot of room in Europe for innovation, but if they go too far, if they overregulate, then some companies are just going to go right over to the US or go somewhere else in the world because they feel like they can't compete.
So that's interesting because I know in the past, the EU, one of their message points is their comparative advantage was their ability to regulate. Now it seems that they're going beyond that, whether it's the Draghi report or some of these other initiatives. Are you sensing change in that dialogue? And then taking a step back, I know digital trade is front and center of your members' interest. Is there an acknowledgement of the role of trade on digital technologies, whether it's AI, robotics, et cetera, and how that plays out?
Most certainly. There's an acknowledgement that we live in an interconnected world where data is paramount, and the ability to ensure that data flows freely across borders is paramount. And the EU itself has actually been a very staunch champion of that at the WTO, for example. So that's where they're aligned with the United States, is fighting against data localization requirements, fighting against restrictions on cross-border data flows. You may have, GDPR, which is a privacy measure. One man's privacy measure is another man's data localization requirement. But when it comes to something like the e-commerce moratorium at the WTO, both the EU and the United States want to make that permanent because they know that's the secret sauce for innovation. If we have all these restrictions on data flows or requirements to keep data locally, or even, mandates to turn over your software source code or algorithms or encryption keys as a condition of market access, that cuts against the innovation agenda of any government. It's not helpful. And that's where I feel like the EU and the US really can work together to achieve a better tomorrow.
And I guess the other, focus area, at least of the US administration, I think of others, is this notion of economic security. We see a lot of, looking at export controls on semiconductors, what impact that has. You got the Commerce Department's, I think it's called the ICTS rules, where they could ban additional transactions for US companies and affiliates. How is that conversation going in parallel with the need to, innovate on AI and some of the other advanced technologies?
Well, Jake, it's commonly said that by some people in the government that economic security is national security, although I think in practice, the measures that some governments are taking to promote economic security are more narrow than others. For the United States, many of the tariffs that are being imposed right now, whether it's IEEPA or Section 232, are done so in the name of economic security. And the goal is to build out a much bigger domestic manufacturing base, irrespective of whether the product itself is a national security product, right? Some other governments are saying, well, we need to ensure that we can make these strategic products in our countries, and maybe not everything, because you might end up with unintended consequences. And so that's the real conversation, is like, how far do we really go to promote national security or economic security? Do we do so at the expense of the consumer? Our position is make these measures as narrow as possible to address real national security concerns without upsetting the consumer. If the costs are too high for the consumer, then the consumer is not going to buy those products, and the companies aren't going to be as profitable, and they're not going to invest in innovation and research and development and new product development. So there are secondary and tertiary effects of all these decisions, and you can't just see it in isolation.
Completely agree. And you've got these policy discussions creating some uncertainty in the business side, but at the same time, what it appears, at least from the outside, is, CES was a major success, a lot of innovation, a lot of new products. From your perspective, walking, not just the presentations, but actually walking the floor, what was one or two products that jumped out like, holy cow, I can't believe they did this?
I don't like to talk about company names, but I'm just going to describe it. There was one company, and I've been following the battery world for a long time, and lithium-ion batteries are the predominant technology right now. This company was offering what they called a paper battery, and it was water-based technology. There was no lithium, there's no cobalt in it.
Regular H2O.
Regular H2O. So recyclable, non-toxic, and I was just like, this is cool. Like, more companies need to exist like this, because if we're talking about electrification of our economy, you want to have batteries that are based off of materials that are widely available as opposed to things that are not. And that jumped out at me and our whole team. Like, I just said that this is one of the coolest things I've seen yet. The other experience that I had wasn't exactly on the show floor. It was off the show floor. It was in the streets of Las Vegas, and there's a company that has a driverless self-driving vehicle. There's no steering wheel at all. There's no front and back. It's exactly the same on both sides. And I took it with some colleagues from one end of Las Vegas to the other, and it got us to our destination perfectly. It was also very entertaining.
All right, so how nervous were you on that ride?
Not nervous, because we're just going down the strip, right? If it went on the highway, maybe I'd be a little bit more nervous, but like, even then, it was really cool. And we saw other vehicles like that along the way, and people in it, and we were all waving to one another. It was fun.
Interesting. So it gets no driver, not even the ability to grab the wheel.
Nope. Not even, there's no wheel.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a saying on that. Again, we kind of read a lot about AI at CES, but what does that mean in practice in terms of, whether it's businesses using AI for internally education purposes, healthcare? As a practical matter, what are you starting to see from a consumer product perspective on AI?
So AI by itself is essentially software, right? It's very complicated software, and the processing of the AI happens either in a data center, or it happens on-prem, or it happens on an edge device. And what we saw at CES is that more of that AI processing, that compute, is happening. It's going to happen in these giant AI factories, as Jensen Huang calls them, but you are also seeing it on devices on-prem, whether it's, servers, whether it's the AI processing is embedded in the laptop, the tablet, the smartphone, whatever other device you have, the television even. So that was what I was most interested in, because that's the real integration of software and hardware. And we're going to see more and more of that, maybe even down to like the device level, where, it could be a microphone, or it could be, something simple that we use every single day in our work or personal lives. It completely could be a wearable. It could be a watch, could be a ring, could be anything else that you use to monitor your health. The possibilities are endless. It just depends on what kind of compute power you need and where that's actually happening.
So overall, what was the mood on the floor at CES? Optimism, cautious optimism, kind of where would you rank it on the scale?
Well, I would say after the year that we've had, particularly on trade issues, where there was a lot of uncertainty as whether we're going to have a robust CES, given all the disruption we faced, there was a mood of optimism that companies are still innovating. They're still coming to CES. They're still excited about technology. They're excited about the future and the possibilities of technology addressing real societal challenges. It's not just, things that we have fun with. There's demonstration of technologies that are addressing actual problems that people face in our societies or in their daily lives. I think health in particular, education, mobility, environment. All of these things, you can find examples of them on the show floor.
So I used to participate in a number of hackathons. I think you have as well. And did you get this kind of same feel of that youthful energy And the other thing I remember on the hackathons is, the kids, I say kids, 15 to 55-year-olds, would come in and they'd want to solve a hyper local issue. We actually did some studies, like 85% of the apps that were developed were trying to solve a societal issue, whether it's congestion, pollution, something like that. Is that the same sense you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, I did have a chance to walk around one part of CES called Eureka Park, and this is where all of the country pavilions are, and governments organize these country pavilions, and they bring delegations of their startups. There's other startups from the United States, from around the world there. Those are people that are trying to solve those exact societal challenges that you're talking about, Jake. And there's a tremendous amount of energy there. I get excited every time I go because I usually see something new and interesting. I mean, there's even universities that come and they bring their startups that were generated in those university environments. There are cities that demonstrate their startups. So it's a really cool place to be. And I think for CES, if you're a technologist or you're into technology, it's, you're in this wonderland. It's just incredible to see how much cool stuff there is out there.
It does sound exciting. And I can tell it's been a couple of weeks and the glow's still there, Ed.
We're still there. I mean, I've already got in my signature block CES 2027. So January 6th through 9th, 2027.
Is registration open? I'm kidding.
Not yet.
But you did mention that kind of this overhang of the trade world issues. Walk us through kind of what are you hearing from your members? What's front and center, and what's in kind of the reaction, whether it's the U.S. government, foreign governments, as you raise those issues? And just one kind of caution, I guess, in the past, one of the key issues we always faced was this notion of right to regulate. Kind of where does that issue stand versus, no, that's a trade barrier we need to really look at?
So for our members, tariffs have been the number one issue for the past year and a half. That's not changing. It's not just the height of the tariffs, it's the variability, the new tariffs that are threatened, sometimes imposed. It's the complexity of the tariff regimes, how they operate with one another. Or do you have to pay the tariff on the content, like certain content, like whether it's steel or aluminum or copper, and then another tariff on the remaining part of the product? This has been the biggest challenge for technology companies, particularly those companies that are small businesses and startups that didn't anticipate having to pay these insanely high tariff costs. We had a lot of companies that were really worried about even surviving in the peak of the tariffs last year, like April, May into June. And, for companies who want to manufacture in the United States, the tariff is not their friend. They had to pay tariffs on inputs they need to build the plants. They had to pay the tariffs on the machinery that they need to build the plants or to operate the plants. They had to pay the tariff on the inputs that they need to produce things in the plants. So this is a problem. I think if the administration really wants to help companies manufacture in the United States, they would provide a little bit more stability and certainty for them, and also understand that putting tariffs on inputs is not conducive to manufacturing products in the United States. We have companies that say, I can make that in the United States, but I cannot do it if you have high tariffs on the inputs. So what's the goal? Is it to make all the inputs in the United States? That may or may not happen. Or is it to make the finished products in the United States? If it's everything, I'm not sure.
Is there also a temporal element where, it does take some time to get the plants up and running to produce the, all domestically components?
Yes, absolutely. It takes time, and it takes skilled labor. It takes an emphasis on infrastructure, permitting, access to education, access to a very robust workforce. I mean, there's so many different things. Respect for intellectual property, rule of law. I could go on and on about all the conditions that you would need to have a successful manufacturing operation in the United States. But importantly, if the goal is to just make things for the U.S. market, okay, but the U.S. market is X percent of the much bigger global market. And if we want to make things to sell to the rest of the world, we have to do that in a way that allows our companies to manufacture things competitively. And so if the costs are too high to manufacture in the United States, there isn't going to be a market for those products when they export to the rest of the world.
All right. So tariffs, number one. Number two?
I would say number two, ensuring supply chains are still efficient and resilient. So much of this disruption has rattled supply chains for technology companies, particularly when the emphasis is on moving production out of one particular country into other countries, and then tariffs come on the country that you move your production to, and that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It's hard for companies to find the stability they need to manufacture if they can't manufacture in the United States.
Gotcha.
So that supply chain disruption isn't just about acts of God, it's about acts of government. And governments do play a pretty big role in disrupting supply chains sometimes. And that's what we saw with these tariffs over the past year.
It also seems to be an extension of the COVID issues we saw, where everybody was rushing to resource to the same location.
Yeah. And you know what? The manufacturing capacity for some products doesn't exist out there outside of certain countries. So you would have to stand up entirely new qualified manufacturing operations, whether it's for the inputs, the raw materials, et cetera, et cetera. So there are spillover effects. Companies can't absorb all the costs infinitely into the future. There will be, at some point in the future, more pass through to the U.S. consumer, the higher these costs are, and the longer this instability around tariffs exists, or the more complex it is, then that also results in higher costs. And I think a third area for us, Jake, is digital trade is just consistently important to our members, and because of exactly what we were already talking about, this integration of software and hardware, where data is generated in the device, or the device is just a vehicle for the processing of data. Consumers use services, whether it's financial services, whether it's healthcare services, even other types of services. So we need to have strong digital trade rules in our relationships between the United States and other countries, in order for not just the sake of competitiveness, but also to ensure that consumers can use things in a cost-effective manner.
What's been the reaction, whether it's from USTR, Commerce Department, or even our trading partners?
Well, this is an area where I think the USTR has done a spectacular job. They are very strong on digital trade. They are strong advocates for ensuring that the high standards of past U.S. agreements, whether it's the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the US-Japan executive agreement that was signed during the first Trump administration, that those high standards are going to be maintained. And that's something we're prioritizing heading into the review of the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. But we want those types of rules to be negotiated in other trade agreements the United States is working on at the moment. And I think they're making progress there. One of the most important new things that this administration has done is getting countries to commit to making the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions at the WTO permanent. In the WTO's history, since this moratorium existed, it's been renewed every single WTO ministerial conference. And the last one was every 2 years. So that's not great for long-term stability, but I was there at MC13 and it almost didn't get renewed. I mean, it was this close. And this administration has been much stronger in support of either renewing it or ideally making it permanent. So we don't have to go to this 2-year cycle of getting it renewed every single time.
One of the other senses I'm getting from USTR is there's a lot more emphasis on the National Trade Estimate Report. In the past, it used to be, everybody, submits the same comments. Here are the trade barriers we're facing, and those comments usually get longer rather than shorter. I've seen a couple of instances where, the ambassador has, recognized the importance of the NT report. I think it's due, March 30th of this year. Are you spending some time, making sure that those key issues are included so that, the U.S. is sending a strong signal, like these are the type of digital trade barriers we're talking about?
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, when I was a staffer at the Commerce Department and at USTR, I worked on drafting, language for that report.
You're probably viewing comments that we have drafted.
Probably. I probably read something you drafted a long time ago, Jake. But it's always been an important report. It's mandated by the Congress. It is a compilation of all the barriers to trade that U.S. companies face in foreign markets. And I agree with you. This administration is placing more emphasis on it because their attitude is, well, many of these barriers have never been addressed. Like we've compiled them for years and years and years, but we haven't seen any progress. And so they're trying to make progress. Now, the past administration had a different perspective on this, that when certain measures were enacted by our trading partners, if there was, this is their language, not mine, if it was in the public interest, then the United States shouldn't try to address that barrier to trade, even if it was burdening U.S. commerce. And I don't think this administration shares that view. If it's a burden on U.S. commerce, if it's unfair, if it's discriminatory, then they should try to address it. What this means for the next NTE, maybe you're going to see an emphasis on certain issues over others. The last NTE was done in a transition sort of way, because the notice for comments went out during the previous administration, and then
October-ish.
Yeah, I think the notice went out like August or September, and then we had a certain amount of time to file comments. But this administration had to finish that off and then publish it. So this is, now they're owning the whole process. So we filed comments along with many other stakeholders. So I'm always anxious to see what comes out. And then what we do internally anyway is compare it against the comments that we drafted and submitted, and to see, where we succeeded and where we didn't. And then we adjust.
So let's bring that back to your membership, because your members range from, you said, small business to very sophisticated technology companies. How do you engage with your membership to make sure that kind of the smaller companies' interests are addressed? Maybe the NTE, maybe that's a good example of working their issues writ large.
So 80% of CTA's 1,200 member companies are small businesses and startups. So we feel like we have very credible voice on small business issues because of that. And it's very hard for a small business to aggregate their concerns about trade barriers compared to a larger business. A larger business has way more resources to throw at it. So what we try to do is listen to our small business members and really hear them. We have an entrepreneurship council at CTA that's comprised of startup founders and small business members. And I speak with them all the time, and I listen to their concerns. And we give them the opportunity to provide feedback on every comment that we draft. A lot of those small business members are also members of our trade policy working group too. So we are very inclusive when it comes to comment drafting, and we just want to solicit as many opportunities for our members to provide input as possible.
When you review those kind of engagements and inputs, how do you see the split between kind of domestic issues for whether it's the U.S. or even state governments versus more kind of the broader international issues?
Well, for the state level, I think we pay very close attention to measures that are proposed in the states that we feel are anti-innovation. And so just as an example, this year, the number of state bills that have been filed on AI has surpassed 1,000 across the U.S. states. So this is not supportive of innovation, because the companies, and especially small businesses, don't want to come up against this giant patchwork of measures that they would have to comply with. And we've argued at the state level for a federal moratorium on AI measures at the state level, because we need a single approach. This is what the moment calls for, so that we as the United States can actually be the global leader in AI and the AI tech stack. And when you have all these regulations and measures that are happening at the state level, it's not really conducive to U.S. technology leadership.
What's been the reception with the federal government? I know DOJ has set up a task force to implement the AI executive order on state practices, making sure that they're not interfering with investment or innovation.
Very good receptivity from this government. This is a very forward-leaning government on AI all the way to the top. And we had, going back to CES, just a tremendous representation of U.S. government officials that are responsible for technology issues. They came to CES. So, for example, Mike Kratsios, Ethan Klein, Undersecretary Kimmett from ITA, he spoke with me specifically about the AI exports promotion program, which we have commented on and we are very supportive of, because this is about promoting the U.S. views and vision and perspectives about AI in the rest of the world and working with our allies on it too. And that is a really important component of what the United States government should be doing, is that we can't do it by ourselves. We have to do it with in concert with our allies.
So a couple of things that you flagged, the upcoming WTO ministerial almost sounds like a litmus test, if you will, on the ability of the WTO to function in the digital age. How do you see USMCA? You mentioned that earlier. I know Ambassador Greer just met with his counterpart recently. They're really kind of launching the bilateral dialogue. What are you hearing from your members on the risk of USMCA versus the opportunity?
So we think that this agreement needs to stand the test of time. It needs to stay trilateral. The United States and Canada and Mexico should renew it. We shouldn't have to exist in a world of uncertainty where we don't know if the agreement is going to last past this year. I think there's a lot of unanimity about this perspective in the industry and in the Congress, but we can't take it for granted. So I think through the course of this review this year, which starts on July 1st, there's going to be a lot of conversations about why this is an agreement that's essential for the United States and for our North American partners as we compete with the rest of the world, and in particular, one big country in Asia. And I think that there's going to be conversations around whether other approaches are better. I think the president has a preference for bilaterals. There's no secret about that. He likes to talk directly with other countries rather than in bigger groups. But that doesn't really work in the context of North America, where our supply chains are so deeply integrated and we've become successful and more prosperous because of it. If you look at our top two trading partners now, they're Canada and Mexico. So tossing this agreement over doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, should we address barriers to trade in Mexico or in Canada? Absolutely. We've cited barriers to trade that the United States government should address. But let's not use those barriers as an excuse to kill the agreement. This agreement needs to live. You can do both at the same time, address those barriers and strengthen the agreement for a much longer period of time.
Yeah, I take the announcement that came out as very positive, of wanting to engage on whether it's updating provisions of USMCA or just simply addressing some of the trade barriers that we face since we signed the agreement.
I read through Ambassador Greer's remarks to the Congress, and it gave me a lot of hope that this is going to end well, but we still have a lot of work to do. And
absolutely.
That's going to be the focus for a lot of us for this year, not just in the tech sector, but I think all of U.S. industry.
If you're, the next time you're in a situation having coffee with, whether it's a CEO or a CTO of one of your members, what's the one thing that you want to put in front of them, make sure that they're focused on?
I want them to focus on the possibilities of more tariffs going forward. And the reason why I say this is that maybe we're like in this period where there's a tariff lull, like, the average U.S. tariff rate seems to have settled in around like 12, 13%, but there's possibilities of more tariffs in the future, particularly under the Section 232 program run by the Bureau of Industry and Security. For our industry, we've come in on a lot of these investigations, but most importantly, the semiconductors one. There was a semiconductors proclamation that came out, but it was very, very narrow on a particular set of national security issues regarding advanced chips. But my gut tells me that they are going to move to impose more tariffs in the future. And they may decide that certain consumer technology products sold directly at retail to consumers are somehow national security products that need to be tariffed, if you will.
So plan for increased uncertainty.
Yeah, I don't think we're out of the woods. And it's not just semiconductors, it's critical minerals. They have an investigation on, drones. They have an investigation on robotics and industrial machinery, and an investigation on medical devices. And that includes over-the-counter medical devices like blood glucose monitors, blood pressure cuffs, wearable health devices, things that are sold directly at retail to consumers, hearing aids, which now, the FDA a couple of years ago, and CTA was behind this, allowed for hearing aids to be sold directly to consumers over the counter. And so why would we want to put a tariff on those devices that are essential for Americans to improve their health?
All excellent points, Ed. As we're running at the end of the session, just take a step back. You've had a more than solid career. You've seen a lot. I won't say back when, but back when you were, looking at your career in college, like scratching combing your hair, where do I take my career? Kind of, how did you end up, where you are, and what advice would you give to aspiring, kids graduating college who want to, make a difference in the world, especially on the policy side?
So I started doing model United Nations in high school. And I think that was really the inspiration for me. Both my parents went to Georgetown in the 1960s. My dad went to Georgetown Law. My mom went to Georgetown Nursing School. So they took me to Washington a lot. And that was my inspiration. I took a different path, though, to get where I am today. In college, I was a classics major. I studied Latin and ancient Greek. I studied abroad in Greece. I studied German as well. And I thought I was going to go into that field, like to be a classical archaeologist. Like I still love it. Like, the Indiana Jones, frame, right? And
You probably have the hat, don't you?
I have many hats. Yes, Jake. My senior year of college, I realized that what I really wanted to do is to see more of the world. Like I grew up in the Midwest. Like my parents took us to Canada for vacation. That was like the one country I visited until I studied abroad in Greece. And then I backpacked around Europe. And after that experience, I really said, this is something that I want to do for my career. And I didn't know at the time it was going to be trade policy per se, but as I educated myself and I spent more time living in Europe after college, that's exactly what I wanted to do, is like this intersection between business and government and how they relate to one another and how they can work together to achieve their shared objectives. And, trade policy spoke to me in that regard. And I was able to find a career path through my graduate school. At the time, it was the Monterey Institute of International Studies. And I got an internship at the Department of Commerce. And then I eventually ended up working in the same office. And that's where I started as a trade negotiator and eventually went to USTR. So I am very lucky insofar as I've had a lot of really great experiences in life and things that were thrown at me. And I just said, yes, I'll do it. I didn't think twice about it.
No, that's great advice. One of my favorite bumper stickers I've seen back when I used to do bumper stickers was, Americans, do something for yourself. Get out and see to the rest of the world.
Yeah. I encourage everybody to get out of the United States and see the rest of the world. It's a big world out there. I love the United States. I love traveling in the United States, especially like in the West. And I love going skiing and I love going hiking and just seeing the beauty and the grandeur of the US. But if we are able to see the rest of the world and to meet other people on their terms, how they live, then we think about things a bit differently. And so I've had the opportunity, I've been very fortunate to travel in my educational life, my professional life, to over 50 countries. That's really meaningful to me.
No, thanks. I think that's a fantastic place for us to end, Ed. I want to thank you for joining us. Your perspective offers exactly the kind of grounded insights companies need as technology, trade, and supply chains continue to collide.
Well, thank you, Jake. This has been a fun conversation, and I hope I can come back someday, maybe when the tariff coast is a bit more clear.
Absolutely. And we'll be looking for your smoke signals to tell us when that's coming.
Yeah, white smoke, not black smoke.
Not the train coming at us.
Yeah.
Ed, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time and walking us through not only what happened at CES this year, but also your members' key issues, ranging from tariffs to digital trade. That's all for today's episode of Tholos Talks. I'm Jake Jennings, Chair of Tech and Trade at Basilinna. To learn more about Basilinna's work at the intersection of trade, technology, and global business, visit basilinna.com/insights or email me directly at jake.jennings@basilinna.com. We'll be back soon with more conversations covering the people, policies, and partnerships shaping the global economy.
Thank you for listening to Tholos Talks, a series by the Basilinna Institute, available on Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Make sure to follow and subscribe to our channels to stay up to date on upcoming episodes. To learn more about these topics or the work we're doing, visit the Basilinna website.